So I'll kick us off. So, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest Active Essex Health Series event, Understanding the Importance of Physical Activity for Children and Young People. I'm Lee Monk, one of our Assistant Relationship Managers at Active Essex, and I'm joined today by Dr. William Bird, CEO and founder of Untitled Health. Before we kick off today, just some general housekeeping. So today's session is going to be recorded. We'll place that on our website. The web link will be shared with you all afterwards, so you can share that with colleagues and take a look back after today's session. We've got a Q&A function live throughout the webinar. So today, please ask any questions that you have throughout the presentation. We're going to have approximately 30-40 minutes of a presentation from William, and then we'll follow that up with a question and answer session. So, like I say, please put any questions you have through the Q&A function, and hopefully we'll be able to answer them all at the end of today's session. If you found today valuable and have any follow-up questions after the webinar, then please do get in touch. I'll send an email with useful links from the presentation and some contact information as well. And so kind of on to why we're here today. So well, we know that physical activity and being physically active is one of the most effective ways to enrich our lives and for the people in Essex and the communities we live in. The vision in Fit for the Future, the physical activity strategy for Essex, Southend and Thurrock is an active Essex to improve everyone's health and well-being. And we know that we can't do that alone, and we can't do that in silo. And actually, it can't just be achieved by the sport and physical activities, the sport and physical activity sector. So we must take a multi-agency approach, have true collaboration and joint up working across different sectors and systems to make physical activity part of everyday life a reality for us all. So today's call is a great example of us trying to do that, and it's brilliant to see such a fantastic representation from across the system on the call today. All of you hopefully in a role or some form of capacity to work with children and families in Essex to try and help them thrive and help our Essex residents be as happy and healthy as they can be. And just, I looked at the roles that people signed up on the call today, and we've got a real rich amount of different people from across the system. We've got National Child Measurement Programme team leads, we've got lead cancer nurses, we've got director of CYP in the CCG, we've got communities managers, we've got healthy schools and community engagement workers, leisure project officers, youth workers, county councillors, and the list goes on. But, so thank you all for joining and hopefully engaging with us today and beyond. So I'd now like to introduce Dr. William Bird, who's going to be leading today's session. Dr. William is a practicing GP championing the positive impact that physical activity has on our health and happiness. William will be sharing some of the science behind why being active and moving more is so important for young people, and then he's going to provide some ideas and suggestions of how you might approach conversations with children and families talking about physical activity. So before we move on to the presentation, we set up a poll and just want to use this as a bit of a baseline for today's session. So now if we could bring up the poll, we're looking for some audience engagement here. And we've started with 3 questions, so we just want to gauge where we are as an audience on today's session. So the first question: how much physical activity should children and young people aged 5 to 18 do to keep healthy? So there's a few options there. We'd like 60 minutes of moderate or vigorous intensity physical activity a day across the week, or 30 or 180 minutes. So have a think, do you know the answer to that one? What percentage of children then reach these guidelines in Essex? Interested to see from the audience what you think the answer is there. And then importantly as well, how confident do you feel talking to children and families about the importance of being regularly active? So if we just take a couple of minutes there to have some responses to them questions, that'd be fantastic, please.
Excellent. So hopefully you can all see that. I'll get Lee or Mel to say if I can't, but I think that sounds like it's okay.
Sorry, I've just had a bit of a computer crash. Hopefully, it sounds like you picked up very well from
Yeah,
where
that's okay, Lee. I don't know what happened there. But what we can do is perhaps go back to the polls at the end, because it's quite useful when we're talking about conversations we're having, because I think that would be useful just to go through that. So I'm going to start from the very beginning, and rather than dive into physical activity with children, what is it that sets the child onto a good path of resilience, and how do you actually get a child to have full health? And before we do anything about diet or physical activity or sleep or all of the things that we then talk about, and particularly diseases like asthma and obesity, etc., let's start right at the top. We are all programmed to be well in 3 different formats, and these are 3 essentials, not just for humans, actually, for pretty much all animals. And humans particularly, though, are prone to that first pillar, if you'd like to call it, of going wrong, and that's that feeling of belonging. If a child, if a person, if any of us don't feel we belong, if we don't have the support of people around us, if we feel we're out of place, we will have huge anxieties, and our stress levels, particularly in adults, are pretty much equivalent to smoking 20 cigarettes for heart disease. So if you're lonely, you might as well be smoking 20 cigarettes because of the impact that has on heart disease. So being lonely, not feeling your belonging, is an incredibly important thing. The second is possibly the kind of central one, which is safe, feeling safe. And if you don't feel safe, then you're going to have anxieties again. You're going to try and defend yourself. And that safe can be a place where you don't feel safe because it's like heavy traffic, or there's air pollution, or there's noise, or graffiti, or you feel there's crime, or all of those, or with the people around you. You're not feeling safe because you're being bullied at school, or you're not enjoying work, or even your family isn't supportive. And the final thing is feeling valued, feeling listened to, feeling important in your own context, of just feeling that you belong, and you have purpose. So if you have that, if you start listening to people, you start to understand what they need, but you also give them that kind of knowledge that they're valued, what they say is valued. Now, I mentioned these 3 things because without them, pretty much anything we do to try and get physical activity won't really work. Certainly diet won't work, certainly all the other things. And a lot of children from very deprived areas or troubled families will have all 3 wrong. All of those 3 things will be difficult. They don't feel they belong. They haven't got the support of their family or those around them. They certainly don't feel safe, and they don't feel listened to. They don't feel valued. So they're constantly having to fight and defend themselves. So if you get those right, we get resilience. And resilience basically means that any child has a stressful event, you get acute stress response, then there's recovery, and they get positive emotions. And that leads to almost automatically an active lifestyle. So if you get all of those things right, so the reason I'm saying that is because if you try and promote physical activity or talk about physical activity, but the sporty ones feel they belong and the unsporty ones don't feel they belong, it's not going to work. If they don't feel safe, they're going to be laughed at because they're not very good at the activity. That's not going to work. And if they don't feel they really are very good, or they don't feel that they've got anything to contribute because it's not something they enjoy, or it's not something they feel they want, that won't work. So when we're promoting physical activity, we have to look at those top 3 things, but also we have to get those 3 things in people's lives, in children's lives, in order to get the good sleep, the healthy diet, the active lifestyle. What we tend to do is dive into the active lifestyle first without realizing we've got to deal with the surroundings and make sure that child is feeling safe, feeling their belonging, and they've got purpose. If you get it wrong, we get this poor resilience, and poor resilience means that they can't cope with stress, and you get chronic stress. That causes negative emotions, and then that leads to inactivity, poor diet, poor sleep. So unless we get those things right, inactivity is going to become a problem. And then that causes all of these problems below. And we're going to go through some of those and look at all of that. All of those things are a result of inactivity plus the diet coming to the same problem with chronic inflammation. And you get diabetes, heart disease, depression, anxiety, dementia, cancers, fatigue, and aging. Now you might think, well, we're dealing with children. What's that got to do with diabetes, and what's that got to do with heart disease? But inactivity, you can start getting high blood pressure and atheromas, in other words, the clots in the lung, in the arteries, in children as young as 8. So we can start to see the impact of an inactive lifestyle, or a poor diet lifestyle, or poor sleep diet lifestyle in children aged 8. You can even see chronic inflammation, which is where the immune system is starting to attack our own body, which we'll talk about, in children as young as 6. So the building blocks of heart disease, dementia, diabetes, depression, anxiety are all being built in these young children. And we can touch and feel it and measure it now, which we didn't used to be able to do because of the technology. So that is where the trajectory is going to go if we don't do something about it. I don't know if anyone's got children like this. It's, oops, sorry, let's go back again. When a child is stressed, their brain will say, right, we've got to conserve energy. So conserve energy just means you go completely floppy. Of course, children do that anyway, particularly teenagers. But there is a survival mechanism here of trying to conserve energy. So again, when you're stressed, it's very hard to get the brain to tell you to exercise, because it's focusing on the very survival of just trying to conserve calories. So you're already on an uphill struggle. Interesting, going indoors compared to outdoors activity really seems to help reduce that stress. So green exercise, in other words, getting children to play outdoors, has significant advantages. And we'll talk about that, but a lot later. There's some amazing advantages of being outdoors. But the important thing is that when a child is outdoors, not only do they get all the activity and it's spontaneous, you don't have to encourage them to do it, they'll just run around and do things, but they also feel much less tense, those negative emotions. That's because the stress is dropping, they're feeling safer, they're feeling valued, and they're feeling they've got their belonging. So getting children outdoors in a place which is safe, yes, if you can't do it and it has to be indoors, that's fine, because that's physical activity in itself. But outdoors in a natural environment is absolutely where we need to get children, because that's where they just spontaneously become active, but you're also dealing with the mental health. And we know that if they go out into green space, activity levels immediately go up without you having to organize anything. So a stressed child will release something called ghrelin. Ghrelin comes from the stomach and it goes to the brain. And in the brain, it tells us to eat. It tells us to eat lots of calories. There's also one called leptin that tells us when we're full. And when you're stressed, the ghrelin goes up because you're trying to conserve calories, because that's what hunter-gatherers did, and your leptin goes down. So you've got a double whammy of a child eating and wanting calories. What's more is the weight they put on goes to the visceral fat. They keep that weight on because they are trying to protect themselves, thinking that in the old days when we were hunter-gatherers, you used to be defending against famine or disease or war. Therefore, when you're stressed, the body immediately tries to get as many calories because you might not be seeing another meal for a long time. So when we talk about physical activity helping weight, actually it doesn't help hugely amount on the calorie front because it's the metabolic rate that does it. But what it does do is we know that physical activity reduces stress and improves sleep. Both of those are more important about weight. So calories in, calories out really doesn't work much now anymore. We've moved away from that. Calorie counting is just not really good. We can talk about fasting, but it's the reduction in stress and it's a gateway to a healthy diet that physical activity is so important. And just to follow that through, if you look at a brain or all our brains, we have a little orange dot there called the amygdala. And that's our negative emotions. That's our fear, anxiety, worry. And it's there for a purpose. It's protect us. The front bit is the clever bit, the bit you do at school, the bit you do at work on Excel spreadsheets. And if we get negative emotions, normally our front part of our brain says, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about, everything's good. And then it shuts that down. When you become inactive, that pathway between those two bits of brain diminishes and disappears. Therefore, the amygdala, which talks about anxiety and fear and worry, hasn't got anything to check it anymore. So it goes a bit AWOL, it goes completely mad, and it starts to create huge amounts of anxiety and worries on things that actually don't need to worry you, because it may have been an event that happened a long time ago, because you haven't now got the front part of the brain to tell the amygdala to calm down because everything's okay. So a poor diet will do this, inactivity does this, and poor sleep does this. And that's why we have an incredible nation now of anxiety, is because we've got our brains in a state where we're no longer able to deal with our anxieties. So that's where inactivity really has an important part. Now, I haven't talked about inflammation, and this is the sciencey bit. You may think that was a sciencey bit. I'm going to go a little bit more, but it's so important for you to understand why activity works. You know, we've already seen some amazing things about your heart and your arteries, and the fact that we've got this inflammation. So let's talk about this inflammation. What is it? We're getting it in children as young as 6, perhaps even younger. And it's where the immune system starts to attack our own body. Now, we may have heard that with things like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or eczema or asthma. They're all different aspects of inflammation. But when you become inactive, then you reduce the inflammation. Inflammation is the thing that causes all those diseases in the future, and we can measure it in children. So we have to get rid of this inflammation. Otherwise, that child is going to end up with the diabetes, heart disease, depression, anxiety, dementia, all the things if we don't do something early on. And it really does start early. So the first thing is fat. There's a fat, which is on the outside, that's subcutaneous fat. And there's a fat on the inside, the yellow. And that is the one that's dangerous and causes chronic inflammation. It causes a big tummy in people. Some of you might have one, some of you may not. But when you see a lot of people with the weight around their tummy, that's probably because they've got this visceral fat. Physical activity reduces that visceral fat specifically and gets rid of it. It may not affect the subcutaneous fat very much, so the weight may not change. And in fact, it's really hard to lose weight just from physical activity. We now know because of the stress and the sleep, it can do it that direction. But from a calorie in, calorie out, it really is hard to lose weight purely by activity. It does help, of course it does. But what it really does is get rid of that yellow. And that yellow is a real dangerous bit. So someone wouldn't even notice that that's happened because they won't lose that much weight. It's not that heavy compared to the rest of our body, but that will really stop the inflammation. So what you're having to do is to say to people, look, when you're active, you're going to start getting rid of some of the dangerous fat inside you. You may not notice it because it's not as heavy as the rest of the fat, but it will work. It will happen. And in about 2 months, you can actually reduce it significantly. And once you've reduced it, all the inflammation, which somehow this weird yellow fat does, will disappear. And therefore your heart will be better, your lungs will be better, your arteries will be better, your brain will be better, that amygdala, prefrontal cortex, that all gets better. Everything starts to improve just because you've got rid of that yellow. Not only that, but when you're exercising, you release all these anti-inflammatories. Brilliant. They go around the body and they calm down the inflammation. And then finally, we go right down to the cells of children, right down to their mitochondria, the little batteries. When you've got sedentary, high-calorie diet and stress, then you actually charge up the battery, but it's got nowhere to go because you're not exercising at all, and therefore it overcharges, and you get these electrons coming out. They're called free radicals, and they start to damage the DNA in the mitochondria. They damage everything around them. We'll see what happens there. So just by sitting for too long, you're starting to cause damage. And we can measure that in children because that starts to cause this chronic inflammation. Get active, low calories, not stressed. Batteries go down, purring away, everything's working. Antioxidants come over, and these electrons, these free radicals are not there, not so much anyway. And then in children and adults, the end of the chromosome is what helps us age well or age badly. And those free radicals coming out will start to age you faster by knocking off the end of the chromosome. So that's a real core of our body. That's where our, that's where we are identified of all our genes. So you can imagine, just by sitting for too long, children sitting there for, we only now know some of the ridiculous figures of about 8 or 9 minutes of children doing outdoor play now on average in some parts of the States and in the UK. So if they're sitting all that time, all those free radicals are coming out and they're causing damage already, and they're causing damage at every single cell in the chromosomes, aging them more quickly, more inflammation, and causing problems. What's amazing is that children and adults who are outdoors in green space, their telomeres don't shorten or age so quickly. So this outdoors constantly comes back now with new research showing how important it is. And children who are age 5 to 7 who spend longer times in green spaces have longer telomeres. That means they're going to be much more healthy. Their cells are much healthier and their brains are working. They haven't got that anxiety part anymore, that amygdala bit, and they're likely to have much healthier profiles as an adult. So you can start to see why I focus so much on physical activity, why I believe this is not just an option. This is just so important. The hippocampus, that's the seat of learning, if you want, in our body, the behavior and learning, that goes up by 20% in children who are active. So a child that isn't active and sitting, you might think, well, that's important because they should be doing all the work. They should be doing their maths. They should be doing their other things, their homework. And they shouldn't think, let's not waste time doing the activity. Let's sit them down and get those exams sorted out. Well, they won't learn because the hippocampus will shrivel up. And if the hippocampus shrivels up, it doesn't matter how long they sit there learning, because they're not going to learn as much. The child that's done 20 minutes of activity and really had a great time outdoors comes back in, their hippocampus will slowly get bigger and bigger, and their capacity of learning will become huge. And their behavior calms down. It's got an aspect of it as well, the hippocampus. And we just know that a single bout of 20 minutes of walking can start to heat up the brain and cause all the activity in the neurons firing off as it starts to really get going. So we've got probably a lot of problems here of identifying what happens when you're not doing any exercise. There are things in schools and there are other things one can do in trying to change playgrounds if possible. And where you start to see playgrounds which have got more parks in it, they call it loose parks, which is lots of things you can play with and lots of work like this. This is a playground in, I can't remember where it is. I think it was in Essex, where they converted it, and children bullying plummeted because the children who were the most imaginative took over. Whereas if you have a big playground of just concrete or asphalt, the children who are the bullies take over. So what they found is that this creativity, when you've got places like this, not only do you get spontaneous activity, but you get the quieter children really active and taking part. It really does help the dynamics. Of course, I'm not saying it's easy to change all of this, and there have been all sorts of health and safety, but there's certainly lots of organizations that can help to make this happen. Finally, there is a website, and then we're going to just talk about a little bit about what we can do to get activity, what way we can start to think about children becoming active. Moving Medicine's a website which is designed for doctors, but actually it's been opened up now for everyone in healthcare. But also the key thing is, if you go to it, you'll find out that there are lots of sheets there about physical activity and how it works and how important it is. So there are things there you can learn about the benefits of it and how you should do it. So let's stop there and then talk. And I'm just going to carry on the conversation, but I'm going to show myself here. How do you start that conversation? How do you start a conversation with someone about active? Well, you all answered about, and if you got it right, it's 60 minutes a day for children. They've got to do of moderate to vigorous activity. So they've got to really be going for it. So it's a lot. It's an hour a day. But a lot of children are doing nowhere near that. A lot of children are doing a lot less. So how do you get someone from doing nothing or doing very little, and perhaps their family don't feel it's important, perhaps their family think it's working is more important, or the parents can't go out because it's too much, it's too difficult, too dangerous perhaps. There may be lots of reasons why a child is indoors all the time. How do you shift them? Well, the first thing is not to frighten them with all those statistics. That's for knowledge. That might help a bit later on. But what you're really trying to do is to say, look at the enjoyment you could do. Look at the fun things. Exercise and physical activity should always be a means to an end, not an end in itself. So you don't get a child to be active purely because they've got to be active. They're like a bolt-on. So they have their normal life and then you bolt on physical activity. That's not going to work, because eventually the normal life will just carry on and the bolt-ons will fall off. What you have to do is to plug in physical activity right into the very heart of what their child is doing. So do they want to go to the park? Do they want to go and do some activities? It may be some sporty thing. Do they want to do nature things? Do they want to get messed up with boots and going into mud? Do they want to go do any other activity with their mates of just mucking around? What is it the child is really enjoying and what to do? Give them that opportunity so that the enjoyment of being with the family, the enjoyment of being with their friends, the enjoyment of being with nature is the key thing. That's the key element. And physical activity is simply a means of reaching that. So rather than saying, oh, you've got to do half an hour of exercise in the morning and half an hour of exercise at night. Oh, that's so boring. Why would you want to do that? But why don't we get a little football game with your mates and I'll be in goal and we can just have a bit of fun? Yeah, brilliant. Let's do that. Let's go to the park and do that. Or why don't we go for that walk where you go into the stream? Perhaps you can find that. So it's not very far away from the house. We could go there. Yeah, that'd be brilliant. What you're trying to do is to find out what it is that will actually make that child. And that's for any physical activity. Physical activity is a means of getting out and expanding your world. It's connecting to people, it's connecting to place, and it's giving you purpose. Those three things right at the top. Physical activity is a way of getting at resilience, but it's got to be part of your life. It's got to be that excitement of going out and doing things. We talk about children staying indoors because that's better. They enjoy it more. They love being on their Xbox. They love playing Fortnite with their mates. Yeah, that's great. Let's do that. But that's not what they want to do all the time. It's just because we don't give them that opportunity very often. So what you need to do, yeah, by all means, do a bit of Fortnite, do a bit of the Xbox, do a bit of that work, but also add on others. Let's not blame the tools there of the games, etc., as being the culprits. The culprits are often us not giving opportunity and not really making a big thing about it and not making it enjoyable. It's almost do your physical activity, let's get that out of the way, and then you can carry on with your normal life again, the sensible bit of life. Whereas in fact, physical activity is the sensible bit of life. It's the only bit of life that's really important by energizing and connecting you to everything around. So the conversations one has with physical activity is not about the activity itself, but what the activity can lead to. And that, I think, is the key element. Let's not get het up about the numbers of minutes. Yeah, it's important to get a guide. Let's not worry if people are doing nothing because they're not, and they can't get to 60 minutes, but they can only get to 30, 20 minutes or 10 minutes or 3 minutes. 3 minutes would be far better than 0 minutes. 8 minutes is far better than 3 minutes. 20 minutes is far better than 8 minutes. So let's move someone along, but actually make it fun all the time so that it becomes that means to an end and get them out. And then explain that actually this is really important to your mind. This is really important to your arteries. Children are already starting to get the signs of disease in the future. So as a parent, yeah, let's get your child out. it's not neutral to sit anymore. You're actively causing damage by letting your child sit for too long. So I think the best thing now is to go for some questions. I don't know if there are any questions. I hope there are, but please just throw in anything you've got that you feel is you're questioning about that, about how to get that conversation going, and also about some of the science. Lee, thanks very much indeed. And I hope you're back now. And then perhaps we can visit the poll as well. And you're on mute.
I'm on mute. My laptop's died. I'm sure it's the only way is up from here for me. But, no, thank you for that. Incredibly insightful. Just tapping into the motivations and interests of what children and families can enjoy, I think, like I say, is so important. Just a reminder, please, everyone. So this is an opportunity for any questions to be answered. I've got a couple actually already. So one for you, William, is so when I work with parents, they tell me that they have little or no money or time to be active with their children. So how can I kind of disarm them to try and think otherwise? Is there any kind of key hints or tips that I might be able to use?
Yeah, it's very easy to think that actually to be properly active, you have to do things that cost money. Otherwise, it doesn't really count. And I think of all the pictures I showed you there in that presentation, not one of them was needing any money. They were all outdoors. They were all in some green space. They're all in parks. They were we haven't talked about walking to school or doing anything. All of that is the activity that's fun. Of course, there is the swimming, there are the sports, there are the leisure centres. But just spending the money on that, looking at what it's doing to the child, if you're not spending that, one has to question. So if that's what the child really, really wants to do, that's the way they want to get active, and it's going to cost some money, then it's a prioritization. That might be the thing, but something else might have to go. Sometimes, of course, it is difficult because people are so hard up, and of course, it's going to get a lot worse. But I think the central message here is that physical activity in general, for all the benefits you can get, you don't need to spend one single penny. It's all about being outdoors, being active, running around, and the walking to school or walking back from school, any of those kind of activities, anything to get outside, and all of that is free. So that, I think, is the central message. The next bit is more complex about having to spend money for certain things, but let's not use that as an excuse not to do activity, because for the majority of the time, that activity can be free.
I think actually for people on the call, I think where then barriers do arise, and there are specific opportunities that we know that cost is a barrier to, is something we can certainly look at in terms of projects of funding or working with you and other organisations to be able to kind of to make that not a barrier and trying to get it over the line. We've had some other questions come through the chat. So are some children born more likely to be physically active because of their DNA?
Yes, like everything in genetics, there's nature and nurture, and it's difficult to know. So you can have the most active parents, really active, and the child just is not interested in activity whatsoever. And I know two runners who are really, really keen. The child just hates it, absolutely hates it. So their nurturing has been physical activity. So there are two questions. Of course, one of them, they could be rebelling and saying, I don't want to do anything. And later on, they might take it up. But there are times where children are less active and not interested, and they find it harder. And they've got all the support they need, and they just don't enjoy it so much. But what they will enjoy is the consequences of activity. There's always something outdoors. So this is where I'm saying that if we focus too much on you've got to do physical activity, or you've got to do your 30 minutes of exercise, and they just think, it's often because they haven't found something in that exercise that's inspired them enjoying it. If you're a really competitive child, then you're going to enjoy some sports. If you're a really energized child and you just boundless energy all the time, then you're going to enjoy anything. But you've got children who are pretty average who find that actually none of that really is exciting at all, but they might be interested in nature. and going out, and then they won't do any exercise at all, but you ask them to, or tell them to go to the lake or the woods, or do something and build a den or something like that. Oh my goodness, they're straight out there. You know, we do the Beat the Street, which is the game which we do from Intelligent Health. And we got parents telling us that their child did absolutely nothing, was completely sedentary. And now they're waiting at the door at 6 in the morning, all dressed up, telling their parents to come and hurry up and get some more points, because they've now got a vision. Now, that's not a child that's an active child or a non-active child. It's a child that suddenly has got something of interest. So it's, you know, constantly go back to this thing of physical activity is a means to an end, and find that end point in the child which they really enjoy, and then you'll get the activity following behind it rather than the activity leading it. Of course, you get those active children, sporty children, but there is some genetics there, but generally it's that motivation that is lacking.
We've got some NCMP staff on the call today, and we've had some questions from through the chat around healthy fat as well. So if I post you, William, so I'm going to make a phone call to a parent to explain to them that their child has been measured and they're overweight or obese. How would you kind of bring into the conversation around being active without just associating physical activity with weight loss?
So I think when you're talking about, and it is, I know I do admire you for those of you on the call who have to make those conversations to parents. I think, you know, as a GP, I have to do it as well, and I always find it very difficult. I mean, what you're doing is obviously taking any kind of blame or judgment or anything completely away, which I know you do really well. But what you're trying to do is to get that positivity of it. You're trying to say, look, at the moment, we know that if a child is indoors a lot, or they're stressed, or they're anxious about things, or they're not sleeping so well, then actually weight will go on. You know, it's one of the automatic things, and it's the brain trying to protect. It's not anything doing wrong. Yes, the diet may not be perfect, but even that, if you've got a child who's really animated, fun, happy, and less stressed, they will often not put on so much weight. So if you focus on, you know, life's difficult at the moment, children are anxious, children are getting stressed, and they're not sleeping as much as they used to do as well. So physical activity can be a real good bonus to try and reduce that stress. We know that in the brain, we know it affects the brain and stopping the stress. We know that it improves the sleep as well. And we now know that it helps them choose the right foods. So move away from this calories in, calories out, that they've got to do a certain amount of, you know, exercise, which just won't happen, you know, if you just say, right, exercise. And tell them that this is actually about the well-being of the child you're improving. It's all part of what children are designed to do, and that you're trying to use physical activity to help them have a better well-being, better balance, better enjoyment, because of the effect it has on the brain. And we now know about the inflammation. So that's the big benefit. To be honest, when we look at physical activity's benefits, only 10% is weight loss. 90% is all those other benefits. So we tend to focus on weight loss purely because of the calories in, calories out. But actually, it's all about the mental health. It's all about the inflammation. It's all about those other things. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is going back to the same thing is, what does your, you know, let's find something your child really enjoys outdoors, or go to a place that really enjoy, and try and find something in common, going with them and trying to, you know, put a couple of jumpers down and be in goal and do a few shots of the ball, or just those kind of things. You're just trying to find it. That may not work for the child, so let's try something else. That may not work. But all the time you're building up a bond, and you're trying to get that activity. It shouldn't cost anything. It shouldn't be called exercise, and it should be fun.
Thanks, William. I think we've had questions come before, actually, around kind of working with families who suffer from ill mental health as well. I guess it's that same approach, really, isn't it? Regardless of whether it's first approaching the conversation around healthy weight or ill mental well-being or other health inequalities, where this kind of way of approaching families and conversations is going to be very similar regardless, isn't it?
I mean, the thing is, and this is a government thing, really, or society, actually, we focus on weight. We focus on weight because we can see it, we can measure it. actually, if you want to talk about health, then weight is yeah, definitely there, but inactivity is actually more important for metabolic. So we're talking about the wrong thing very often, but you can't see inactivity, but you can see weight, and hence the reason we focus on weight. So everything is talking about let's reduce weight and obesity. Well, actually, we're kind of not really measuring the right thing. If we look at the real science, it's actually inflammation, and inflammation is all that connection between poor sleep, a poor diet, inactivity, and having that resilience. So that's really what we should be talking about.
I'm certainly knowing that we'll be following up on that around measuring the wrong things. Yes, completely agree. Okay, I've got a couple of other questions. So we've had a question saying, are the green gyms in parks suitable for children?
As far as that, specifically on that question, are they suitable? They are designed for adults, not all of them, I think, but they are designed for adults, but children definitely can use them. It's if they're fun. I think that's the answer. So when you say suitable, yes, you could talk about the height and the kind of grip and the safety and everything like that. Or you could say, is it suitable because my child enjoys it? If they love it, it's suitable. If they actually find it really boring, it's not suitable, irrespective of how high it was. So trial it out and see what happens. We do find it's, those green gym, and I talk about green gyms because I set up a green gym, which is about conservation work. These green gyms, just for everyone to know, there are the outdoor gyms, really. They're the ones in the parks. And, it means you don't have to go to a gym and get, pay anything. You just do it in the outdoors. Mixed reviews, but definitely some people find them brilliant. But it really has to be, for suitability is about enjoyment.
We've got another good question here around kind of social media use and imagery. So how do we as health workers break down the attitudes and extreme culture and images of exercise presented by social media, and that all or nothing, lean and athletic versus just normal people being active and having fun?
Yeah, so basically, just been getting a question is, how do we deal with that kind of extreme activity, the extreme exercise, athletic?
I guess it's almost, yeah, I think the question's going towards, it feels on social media that the end goal is to look like or be like the super fit, lean, athletic.
And that's really hard. We know that's a real problem. And when I talked about those 3 pillars of belonging, of feeling safe, and of being valued, that big value one is people don't feel they're valued when they don't look right, when they're not perfect. When they look at Instagram of someone else, they see this sort of highly photoshopped picture of someone, it makes them feel inadequate. So we know that it's affecting those pillars and belonging. If you're not quite right with the social media, you start to be out of the group and you stop belonging. So the negativity of social media can be really strong. Positivity, of course, can be really strong. It's only the messenger, but it is a big thing. When it is in a way looking at the extreme bodies of the 6-packs and everything else like that. That is obviously completely different from a holistic well-being of a child, and it can be damaging. This is something where the parent, the teachers, anyone in contact with a child, just has to completely reassure that yes, they will belong. It doesn't make any difference to them, and it's nothing to do with happiness, and it's nothing to do with mental health improvement, and it's got nothing to do with health, really, to have that kind of extremeness. You can do all of those things by just having a much more gentle activity, but it's an attitude that needs to be dealt with. And I think that's outside the realms of just physical activity and much more in how do we cope with social media norms for children, which I think is obviously a big issue. But certainly that is not what we need for a healthy child. You don't have to go to those extremes. The 6-pack is not needed in a teenager. When I was growing up, I don't think anyone ever had a 6-pack. It started to become almost the norm. It's really hard. But I really feel strongly for children. It's really hard at the moment.
I think they're the only questions we've had in the chat. I'll just give a couple of minutes, just final, if you do have any.
I can see a few. Lee, I can see a few more actually. How important is the diet?
Yeah, it's cool down.
Yeah, how important is the diet alongside physical activity?
Yes, we covered that one alongside kind of the MCMP question, or do you want to answer that one?
Well, I could just quickly say that one, that the diet, when you're active, as we know, your ghrelin and your leptin change, and therefore you're more likely to eat less, bizarrely. So activity helps you not only eat a bit less and don't have this craving for high calorie food, except there's one exception, and that is in the swimming pool, because you're cold. So when you come out of the swimming pool and you're cold and you go past the machines with the chocolate, you're craving for chocolate. So that is one of we're down to, that's your temperature, not the activity. But in general, when you're active, you'll find that your leptin and your ghrelin, which both kind of regulate your hunger, will actually improve. And therefore you actually eat less. And in studies they've done, you actually choose more healthy foods as well. So both have to work together. If you want to lose that weight, it has to be both together. Physical activity will do a bit, diet will do a bit more, but together they do a lot. And that's really the message on that.
There's just a couple of others. So is there a specific measure, a questionnaire that is used by GPs to measure physical activity levels in children?
Yeah, we do. There are quite a few actually. There's one which is Sport England one, and then there's the single item one, and then there's something called the GP pack, which actually we use for physical activity. I'm always slightly, I mean, it's good for research, it's good for understanding, you know, someone active or not. Usually by having a conversation with someone, you can get a more accurate kind of vision, because most people know they're not doing enough. Not everyone, but most people know they're not doing enough. And I think irrespective of what the questionnaire says, you've got to get it in their mind that it's not quite enough and they could probably doing more, because once they believe that, they go through it. But yes, if you look up GP pack, that's PAC, so GPA, it's GP PAC, so it's got two P's in it. That's the one we use. It's not brilliant, but it's okay. And then there's the single item question, which over the last 2 weeks, how much have you done this and this? That's not designed for children, that's designed for adults. And there are the Sport England ones for children. But I tend to, when I'm talking to a patient, tend to actually just have a conversation rather than using one of those.
Thank you, William. And then just final one as well. Very inspiring presentations. Thank you. We've hit the nail on the head with that today. Comment, it seems that enjoyable social connection rather than an isolated effort is a key ingredient in sustained effective activity.
Yeah, absolutely. That big pillar of belonging is so important. And that's why that's why organized sports and organized things have a double-edged sword. In one point, they can bring everyone together and it can be really enjoyable and everyone says that's brilliant. But the quiet ones may have just faded away on the outside because they didn't feel they belonged. So it's getting those ones on board, and it's ones who are not sociable, shy, quiet, no confidence. And what we found is actually doing that's why I've put nature quite a lot on there, because that really does attract them and get them in there. So, and that, when you have nature and children together, then you've got a real positive, because they don't bully each other. When they're out in nature, they behave completely differently. And that's been shown scientifically compared to indoors, where there's a hierarchy. It's a completely flat hierarchy when you've got children outdoors. They're much more helpful to each other and much more constructive to each other. But absolutely right in that question. It is the belonging, it is that social aspect that's important. But just be cautious that you don't get such a social clique that you get those quiet ones fading away, which can happen in some cases.
Thank you, William. I think that concludes our questions that we've had in today. I've just got one in terms of, and I'll ask it to myself. So how can I signpost children and families to local physical activity opportunities? So just so you're all aware on the call, we have a relationship manager, assistant relationship manager in each of the local authorities across Essex, Southend and Thurrock. We have a good understanding of our places and relationships locally. So please, after today, I'll share contact information. do reach out, make new relationships, and also we have Find Your Active community connectors as well in the 12 local authority areas in Essex County Council districts. So in there you'll find we've got a part-time member of staff working on the ground, trying to understand what local physical activity opportunities there are for both children, families and adults. So please do tap into that as a resource. I think each of them has an active Facebook page as well, where they can post in all of their local opportunities and the new connections they're making, so do make use of that. And then we also have an activity finder as well, which is kind of open data compliant and pulls in lots of information from different sources as well. So there's a couple of kind of easy access opportunities to try and help with your signposting and working with children and families as well. So I appreciate we didn't get back onto the polls, but you might remember, and I kind of had a bit of a crash during it, but the third question on the poll was around what is your confidence and how confident do you feel talking with children and families about physical activity? So, there we go, perfect timing. Yeah, as William said earlier in the presentation, 60 minutes of moderate activity is what we're aiming for children and young people. Actually, in Essex, currently only 42.4% of children are reaching that. So there is some work to be done to try and kind of increase that number. And as I said, thank you to all of you who have engaged in the call today, because absolutely this isn't just something that Active Essex can achieve or Intelligent Health can achieve. It's going to take us all pulling together in the same direction to really make a difference. And then, yeah, just I guess to leave from today, how confident do you feel? We've got some super confident people, a few of you on here already. Hopefully you're still feeling super confident. But our aim today was hopefully to at least bring you back up a bracket of kind of some of them answers. So hopefully those of you that said I'm not confident at all, or I have some confidence or I'm confident, you're starting to feel, well, actually, I've got a little bit of more understanding behind me. I feel better connected in terms of some of the resources, opportunities that are out there. And as I say, I think today is just a start for a conversation. So when the webinar finishes today, there'll be a very short survey that will just ask just general feedback on today's session. How did you find it? Was it useful? What aspects of it were useful for your role? And also any future training needs, any kind of networking or something like that that might be useful. Would be really keen to hear from the audience what that looks like and how that would benefit you, so we can continue to work together on that. So that's me done. William, any final closing remarks?
No, it's been really great and some really good questions there. So I think the summary coming across, and someone said it is all about that social aspect, that enjoyable aspect, that kind of inspiring, connecting. And physical activity is just an engine bit that makes it happen rather than the end bit, which I think hopefully come across. But I just feel just to admire all those of you who deal with the parents, who deal with the schools with their children are inactive and overweight and have to try to get that message. Really, really appreciate how difficult it can be, and hopefully that's helped a little bit more in your conversation. So it's a positive conversation rather than a negative, conversation. I think that's really what we should be doing. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Really appreciate your time and insight and conversations today and questions there. That's fantastic. So recording will be sent out. I'll collate some useful links to moving medicine resources and everything. I'll be sending that out hopefully later today for everyone, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.